All right, welcome back live at Drew's house. Another edition. Hope everybody's doing okay out there. Hope everybody is safe as we move through 2021, as we move through January, flying right along. I'm joined by, you guys know how much we love doing the music shows in here. I am joined by a great American songwriter. Tom Rush is joining us. What a pleasure coming to me from Rockport. I didn't realize how close we were in distance. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing very well, sir. Living the dream, just like everybody else.
Absolutely. I told you, we were just laughing off the air a little bit about how the interview I did before this was with UFC fighter Joe Lozon. And I was telling you a couple stories, and you said, I think I'll stick to playing the guitar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's dangerous, but it's not as dangerous as that fighting stuff.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned it seems like stage fright on steroids. That's a real thing, isn't it? Stage fright, do you still get that after all these years in the business?
No, not really. But I have friends who have had to basically quit showbiz because they couldn't handle. Carly Simon just got terminal stage fright and had to back away from doing shows.
There's epic stories like that. I think like Van Morrison, I remember, was didn't really enjoy playing. Didn't like the whole idea. There's several stories, right?
Yep. I've been lucky in that regard. I mean, I got very nervous way back when. But then I basically got tired of being nervous and I got over it.
Absolutely. So Tom Rush, how you been? How's the family? First of all, everybody doing okay through the pandemic? Or?
Well, I got the virus back in March. I was really pretty sick for a couple of weeks. Didn't get hospitalized. Didn't get a lot of the typical symptoms. I didn't have the cough or the fever, but I just felt like crap for about 5 days. 5 days getting worse, 5 days really feeling bad, 5 days getting better. And now I'm fine.
Okay. Well, you look good. I'm glad to hear that. How about your circle? Did any other family members get it?
My daughter was here with me when I had it, and she got it, but much milder because she's only 21. Yeah. She got it much milder than I did. And so we're both out of it. We're both hopefully
You still with me there, Tom? You cut out there for a second. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Oh, there you go. You're back. I got you. Keep going. Sorry.
I'm hardwired into the router, so...
You see you're crystal clear now. We're good.
Okay. My daughter was here. She got the virus, not as badly as I did. And we're both immune now, supposedly. I'm still going to get the vaccine when it's available, but... I haven't been as worried. I worry about other people. I haven't been as worried about me.
I can imagine this, somebody who's been in the business as long as you have, I'm guessing this is the longest time you've gone without really being on stage. Is that accurate to say? Or?
It is accurate to say. I've had 60 shows either canceled or moved way down the calendar. It's basically a year's work.
Man,
out the window. And I my first response was to promote private concerts to my crowd. And as long as we could do that outdoors, that worked really well. Mm-hmm. But then winter came, and we'll see what happens in the spring. It may be the pandemic is still not under control. And so meanwhile, what I've done is started an online subscription series called Rockport Sundays, since I'm playing these out of Rockport. I had an instrumental years ago, before you were born, kid, called Rockport Sunday that people loved a lot. And so every Sunday morning I'm sending out a song, a new song, an old song, maybe a story. What's going to go up tomorrow Sunday, it will be the story of Clint Eastwood and the Hashish Brownie. And
I'm going to need to know that story.
Well, you're going to have to sign up then, Sonny boy.
Well played.
If you go to, actually, I'll tell you the story, but if you go to tomrush.com, there's a link there where you can sign up for Rockport Sundays. And it's been a lot of fun. And a lot of people have been signing up. And I think I will probably keep this up even after I'm back on the road someday. Because it really has been fun. And I get a lot of positive feedback. I don't get to hear people clapping their hands, but they leave me little notes saying how much they enjoyed this or that. And
that is such a true story. We have a lot of artists on the show, and it's one of the things that kept coming up. I remember I say this on the show all the time, but our singer-songwriter Ryan Montbleu said to me once, he was the first one to say this to me. that he had to tell the family members to stop doing the clapping during the virtual performances because it reminded him too much of a sad bar. It was kind of like depressing.
I did a show at the Wang Center with Noel, Paul Stuckey, and Jonathan Edwards, just the three of us in an empty hall. And it's like a 3,500 seat room, gorgeous place. But my comment there was, it actually feels good to see all those empty seats and know it's not my fault.
That is fantastic. That's a great
By
line.
the way, just as a little side note here, I'm urging everybody to support their local performing arts venues every way they can, because my concern is that, you know, the pandemic will someday be over, but some of these places will be gone.
Yeah.
And that would be very, very sad.
It's nice of you to say, and it's so true. And you know, you're an established musician, and I have been saying that for the ones that the kind of like the young artist that had some momentum going and was really trying to break onto the scene, I have just found it to be devastating for some of those artists. I'm sure you remember that coming up, and people were starting to kind of catch on to your music, and you were starting to gain a fan base. And I can imagine you probably think about those young artists a lot and how tough this has been on them.
Well, I do. I mean, I've somehow gotten a reputation as being a patron saint of of up and coming artists.
Yeah.
And there was an album I did way back when called The Circle Game, which was the first recordings of James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell. And it really, I think, caused a bit of a stir because these three fabulous writers were all introduced on one project. Right now, I'm working with a guy named Matt Nakoa, who is a monster talent, and I'm trying to promote his career to my own detriment. I will miss him terribly when he moves on. But my hope is that when he's playing stadiums, I get to open the shows.
Wow, very cool. Well, that's a good plan. Hey, let's. We all can't wait till we get back into stadiums, right?
That would be a treat. That would be a treat.
What has been the toughest part about the pandemic for you? I see you got guitars, so you're surrounded by guitars in your house there. I'm sure that keeps you busy, but do you genuinely miss the interaction with your fans of that person to person?
Of course. I think that's what keeps a lot of performers going, is the chance to get on stage and actually interact with a live audience. The Rockport Sundays online thing has been a very close second, though, because I do get feedback. It's delayed. It's not on the spot. Yeah, I miss traveling and touring, and I don't miss the traveling actually at all. But being on stage, the couple of hours on stage is the reward for all the stuff that feels like work.
You made a joke about being kind of the paving the way for a lot of those young artists. Some of these names, by the way, that you've overlapped with. You mentioned Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Jackson Browne. I mean, some of the names that you cross paths with. It's kind of like a who's who of the American songbook. What has the life been like for you?
Would you repeat the question, please?
What has the life been like for you in music? Being able to meet all these superstars of the game, really, and it's just work with them, be in this musical songbook. It must be kind of fascinating.
Well, the good news or the bad news, depending on your perspective, is that these people are people. Some of them are really sweet and nice, and some of them aren't. And you just have to, deal with them the same way as you would deal with the people you meet elsewhere. I got over being, super impressed by stardom quite a while ago. I am impressed by people's work, but just the fact that they're famous doesn't really mean much.
Is there a young person out there, maybe who you haven't mentioned, that is kind of catching your ear in the pandemic that you've just settled down and found yourself listening to a lot?
Well, Matt Nakoa, who is actually joining me on a lot of the Rockport Sundays shows, backing me up, has a career of his own, and it's building all the time. He's becoming less and less available when I have a booking or had a booking. I haven't had bookings for a while.
Yeah.
So he's the one that I'm excited about right now.
Okay, and how about one of the maybe a name I just mentioned? A lot of these artists that are have been in the business for decades and decades that keep releasing new music. You're still releasing new music, as you said, writing new songs. It fascinates me how many of these artists have had the staying power and are releasing music that is still relevant today, and were doing so 40 years ago as well.
I think that's, if you're an artist, you're an artist. I think some of the folks that have faded away because they were, something that the record company created, for instance. They didn't really have a love for the art and the craft, and but yeah, I think there's no reason. I've written more songs, Drew, in the past few years than I have in the past 50.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah, my most recent album, which is called Voices, available at tomrush.com, by the way. I wrote all the songs, and that's never happened before. I've always done mainly other people's, a couple of my own, maybe. But that album, and I didn't mean to do that. I just was sitting down trying to figure out what should go on the album, and I realized, hey, I wrote all these songs. Except there are 2 traditional songs because I don't want to compromise my folk singer credentials. But I've now got enough songs for another album. And as soon as I can get back in the studio, actually, I'm presenting that album a song at a time on Rockport Sundays.
Beautiful.
Just homemade. I like the homemade thing. It took me a little while to get used to it. I've got a professional videographer guy who's been doing the shooting, and so the production values are great. But I get to be casual as opposed to on stage where I really feel everything should be just right.
Yeah.
In the I do a lot of these from the kitchen or from this room, the living room. And, if I stumble, it's okay. In fact, people, I think, enjoy. It's kind of a backstage pass to, seeing how things happen. Matt and I will discuss before we play something, we'll discuss how we should do it. And then we'll launch into it and then maybe stop and start over again.
That's what kind of gives it that live feel, right? I mean, that's why people love live shows. You never know what's going to happen. Mistakes are kind of built in. It's you never know what's going to hit you. That's
well, it's a personal thing, and I think people enjoy joining me in my kitchen and or in my living room.
Yes, and welcome to my kitchen. I should have said that to start.
Well, there you go. You got a nice kitchen there.
Thank you. My wife does all the decorating. Yeah. I wanted to ask this question to you because you're the folk music genre is something that I've always been into, and for me it never went away. And I don't want to insult the genre by saying it never went away, but a lot of folk music is tough to hear on the radio, especially when I was growing up. But I do see a trend here in recent years of a lot of kind of bands with at least folk music roots kind of coming back. I think a lot of like groups that have made it like on the radio too. I think of like the Lumineers and like Jason Isbell and like a lot of these big time names that are maybe not young, but they're on the radio. But all these folk roots that I hear, which is a little bit refreshing. I wonder what's your take on the music of today and how folk music plays into that?
Well, we're going to get a bit academic here.
Oh.
This is the Harvard English major coming out. To me, folk music is traditional music, songs that don't have an author. They go back 100 years, but they exist in 100 different variants, and none of them is the right one. They're all equally valid. If you wrote a song, it's not folk music, by my definition. So there are still people out there doing traditional music and making a living and making beautiful music at it. But it got to where the term folk really didn't mean much. Bruce Springsteen did an album in his basement with just an acoustic guitar. Why is that not folk music if Woody Guthrie's folk music? So it was a very vague definition. But the other thing I think that's happened, Drew, is that the internet has enabled so many different genres to come up, and they're overlapping. And I mean, it used to be there was rock and roll, there was classical, there was jazz, there was pop, whatever that meant, and that was about it. And now there's dozens and dozens of genres. If you look at the Grammy Awards, they've got 800 categories. I want to announce, by the way, that I've won all the Grammy Awards. They haven't announced it yet, but I have it on good authority that I won. Even the best female rap singer, I took that one.
Really? How'd you take that one?
Well, I can't talk about that. That's a trade secret.
Oh, that's too funny. So, okay, that's interesting. I have heard that definition, and you're right. I mean, it depends on who you talk to and how they define it. I do think the Grammys actually have different rules than you when it comes to the folk definition. Am I right?
Possibly so. Possibly so. But it's vague. It's vague. But I think the other side of the thing is that now with the internet, it used to be, when I started, if you did not have a record deal, you didn't exist.
Yeah.
You were invisible because the record company got you on the radio and they got the newspapers to write about you, and that would sell concert tickets, and around it went. Now there are kids, any kid with a laptop can make music in his bedroom and put it up for all the world to see. And most of it sucks, but sometimes it's brilliant. And there are acts out there filling stadiums that I've never heard of. They've never had a record deal. They've never been written up in a newspaper. They've never been on the radio. It's entirely internet.
Yeah.
It's like so Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish. I think that big pop album that she came up with, I believe, was done in her bedroom with her brother.
Yeah. It's a very, very different world, and it's enabled a lot of really good music. But I think the idea of genres has become a little vague. I actually learned a lesson early on. I'd made my very first album, Tom Rush Live at the Unicorn, was a kind of a homemade thing. The guy was distributing it out of the backseat of his Studebaker. And I went into the Harvard Coop, which was the record store in town at the time. And my new album was in the blues section. And I went to the manager and I said, well, I do some blues, but I'm not really a blues singer. I also do some folk. And he said, okay. And he took me over and put it in the folk section. And I said, well, actually, and after a couple of more moves, he said, okay, put me in miscellaneous. And I learned the lesson not to argue.
I can picture you in the record store arguing. Well, I have to differ with you there.
Yeah. It got a little academic, and he got kind of impatient. But anyway, I don't know what I guess singer-songwriter is as broad as it gets, really.
I do wonder about we talked about kind of the younger artists, and you just mentioned a name, Springsteen there. And one of my, you can't really talk folk music a lot without talking about Pete Seeger too, of course, the late Pete Seeger. And we have Inauguration Day coming up. And I think back to that moment. For me, it was what felt like kind of it was definitely a different White House regime coming in. Felt like a big moment in American history when Pete Seeger jumped on the steps of the Capitol building and sang with Bruce, and they did This Land Is Your Land. And of course, a lot has happened since then. But I did see Bruce is going to be part of the inauguration again. It made me think back to that moment. Is that a moment that sticks in your head, watching Pete Seeger sing on the Capitol steps for Barack Obama?
I think it was totally a deserved honor for both of them. It was moving because Pete had such a long and storied career, hard times, good times. I remember him telling me there was a time he was playing in Spain, and just before he went on stage, it was a huge crowd outdoors. Before he went on stage, the officials gave him a list of songs he could not do because they would be inciting the crowd. And it was basically his whole set list. So he got on stage and would say, I can't sing this song, but you can. And he'd start to play it, and the crowd would sing it for him. And that's just amazing.
Did you get to know him pretty well?
I didn't know him as well as I would have liked. Our paths crossed many times, but it was, always, on stage, off stage, how you doing in the dressing room kind of thing.
That is fascinating. I know Bruce tells the story about that inauguration day that Pete said, Bruce, I would love to do this with you. This will be great. This will be an honor. One rule, we have to sing all the verses.
Very cool.
may or may not be surprising. Again, we're joined here by Tom Rush, a great singer, coming to us from Rockport today, which is, Rockport is a beautiful spot on the North Shore. For those of you who don't know, you get a chance to see Rockport, or maybe don't. Maybe they don't want people flocking to Rockport. I don't know.
They're not encouraging it at the moment.
Yes, that is true. Pandemic travel. But do you find the location, being in Rockport, inspires songs out of you?
I wouldn't say the location does. I really, to be honest, Drew, I don't know where the songs come from. They kind of drift. They drift through the room, and I try to write them down before they drift away again. And sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. But they seem to happen regardless of where I am. And I'm happy about that. Are
you happy with, you said you've been writing the most songs of your career right now. Do you see that being something that you're interested in doing even post-pandemic? Are you going to try to write more? I mean, you're always evolving as an artist. Do you see that in the cards, or you're just not sure?
I don't know if I try to write. It happens, or sometimes it doesn't happen. But in the best context, I sit down in the morning with a cup of coffee before I'm fully awake and fiddle around on the guitar, and these ideas start, drifting in from outer space, and I try to grab them and write them down. But I'm working on actually 3 different books. One of the things I'm offering for Rockport Sundays is pages from a book I'm writing called, the working title is Roadmap. And it's basically an explanation of why you probably don't want to be a touring musician. But it's stuff like, and I'm trying to keep it entertaining. It's been a lot of fun writing it, but I think it should be fun for people who have no notion of being a traveling musician. But stuff like how to do a sound check, how to conduct an interview, how to keep mentioning Rockport Sundays, even though the interviewer isn't necessarily asking you about it.
I was going to say, I hope you're not evaluating me as we're going.
No, you're doing a brilliant job, Drew. I want to mention, by the way, we're BZ, right?
This will be used parts of it will be used for BZ. This is also the full show will be played out of Newburyport, a station called Joppa Radio as well, which is locally funded. And we try to give all our local musicians as much time as possible. And it's really a good place to kind of have these free-form casual conversations, which I love.
Well, I was just thinking, we were talking about Pete Seeger. I had a little radio show on Harvard's FM station, WHRB, back when I was a student. And it was a show where I had to have guests come on, and Pete Seeger was one of my guests.
No way, really?
And he went to Harvard. He didn't graduate, but he did go to Harvard. But across the river at WBZ, Jefferson K and Dick Summer had folk music shows, and they would invite me over. And I kind of figured, well, I've got this radio show. My audience on a good night is numbers in the dozens. And then I can go across the river and talk with Dick Summer and Jefferson K, and it's kind of we're on a par. Yeah. And I did not know what 50,000 watts clear channel meant. These guys got fan mail from New Zealand and Guam, and had regular listeners in Ohio and up into the Maritimes and down into Maryland.
38 states in Canada.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And at night, you're right. We get, I know WBZ still gets emails to this day from, there's like radio, whatever you call those, radio spotters or whatever, who will be in parts of the world. And especially in those overnight hours, will try and get signals from different places. And you would not believe some of the locations that I've dialed into WBZ in Boston.
Right. If I ever had a big break, playing on WBZ with Jefferson K and Dick Summer was it, but I was totally oblivious at the time.
Might have been a good thing.
Probably so. I would have been terminally nervous.
That is too funny. But yes, it is fantastic. One of the things I've really enjoyed about doing this show is, you started to mention the life, the travel, all that stuff. And one of the things that keeps coming up in this pandemic is these songwriters talking about, to be honest with you, the life of a musician is not the easiest life anyway. I mean, there's a lot to it. Throw in a pandemic with no gigs, it's a struggle right now to be in the business.
Yep. And that's, basically why a lot of us have gone online to try to connect with, not only connect with an audience, but connect with some kind of cash flow.
Yeah.
And I'm actually having a great time doing the Rockport Sundays thing, which you can sign up for. Actually, if you go to youtube.com, Tom Rush Music, all one word, Tom Rush Music, there's a free sample there of what the Rockport Sundays thing is like. But you can sign up at tomrush.com and subscribe for a mere $10 a month.
Look at that. Beautiful. And what's you have embraced technology. I know that is not the easiest thing. I know, like, even in my own family, I have aunts, uncles, parents who just really at the beginning had no interest in doing Zoom interviews, had no Zoom conversations. It was, I mean, now everybody seems to be on board, but you've kind of embraced the ability to kind of do something different. Talk to me about that thought process.
Up to a point, Drew, only up to a point. I've got a young lady who handles the social media stuff for me because I don't want to tweet. And so a lot of that stuff is very mysterious. I, in fact, haven't done a whole lot of Zooming. One thing I have been told, though, is if I want to play music on Zoom, I've got to go into the settings and tweak a whole lot of stuff because it's set up for conferences, not for music. And music really will sound awful unless you tweak the settings.
Well, there you go. That's more.
I don't know how to do that, but I know that I should do it.
That's very funny. We were talking a lot about Pete Seeger. Very random question here. I wonder, has there been an artist, and maybe it's him, I don't know, but has there been an artist where you were just, and you're a comfortable guy, but where you were just starstruck, where you were like, this has been an idol of mine. I can't believe I'm meeting this person. How did I get here?
Well, there've been a couple of them. There was a guy named Josh White who was basically a cabaret singer. He was a very slick act, and actually the Cambridge folk scene did not approve of him because he was very polished and slick, and they wanted people who'd built their own banjo, who couldn't read and write. Many of whom were brilliant musicians. Anyway, I met Josh actually through this radio show at Harvard. He was my guest one day, and I was kind of about what do I say? The other one, excuse me. There was a guy named Eric von Schmidt who was, in my mind, the cornerstone of the whole Cambridge folk scene. He was a bit older than most of us by 5 years or something. Famously
on a Dylan record, right?
He's mentioned on Dylan credits him. Eric never quite got over the fact that Dylan stole his song, even though he credited him. Eric didn't make any royalties on that.
Oh, is that true? He wasn't happy.
No, he wasn't happy about it. But he was a marvelous. He wrote some marvelous songs, but he also would go into the Library of Congress recordings and find songs, really incredible songs that none of the rest of us could decipher. And he was a graphic artist. That was his main gig, actually. But music was something he loved. That was, if I can go off on a tangent, one of the differences I keep getting asked, what was the difference between the folk scene in New York, the folk scene in Cambridge, or Cambridge, Boston? And it was that a lot of the singers and writers and players in Boston didn't want to be professionals. There was a typewriter repairman who was a brilliant mandolin player and high harmony singer. There was a psychopharmacologist who was very popular, banjo player. They didn't want to become professionals. They were playing for the fun of it, for the love of the music. Whereas in New York, it was much more professionally oriented, guys who wanted to get matching shirts and go on the road. Mm-hmm. And I think that was one of the key differences between the two cities.
That's interesting. I can see where that would be true. Again, we're joined here by Tom Rush. Dylan just creeped into my mind a little bit because I have had some artists on this show who have been opening acts for Bob Dylan, who toured with him. And one thing that kept coming up, and feel free to pass on this if you'd like, but Bob didn't necessarily go out of his way to be friendly to even people that were touring with him.
Right.
Have you met him? One, and was he pleasant?
I haven't, mind you, I haven't seen Bob in decades, many decades. But I did, when he was just starting out, I did know him. I remember sitting with him in a coffee shop in New York. His first album had just come out. And actually, I remember thinking, you know, if only he had a better voice, he might stand a chance. Great songs, but oh, that voice.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're sitting in this coffee shop. His album had just come out. And some guy comes over to our booth and says, "Don't mean to bother you, but I really like your new album." Dylan cornered this guy and pumped him for about 20 minutes for compliments. He was really eager to be told how great it was. And in retrospect, it was great. But he could be abrasive. I remember at one point asking him, you know, how hadn't seen him for a while. "How are you?" And he said, "Do you really care?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a shallow, you know, greeting kind of thing. "How you doing?" But he called me on it, you know, and
Yeah.
so he could be abrasive, and but he's written some great songs.
And the fascinating thing about him is what I have always found fascinating about him is the voice. And people do laugh about the voice, obviously, and you hear the Bob Dylan impressions and everything. And but there are songs and there are albums where he can sound really, really nice and have a beautiful voice. I think of like Karina Karina is one of my favorite songs, and I just think he sounds beautiful
Uh-huh. I do that song too.
on that.
I just started doing it for this past the album Voices that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, he's a chameleon. He keeps reinventing himself, which is great.
It is interesting. And what about who is the person that has? Let's answer this one first. Nicest person you've ever met in the music business,
Well, me, of course.
besides you.
Besides me. Oh, besides me. Um, I'd have to give some thought to that, because one of the things that happens with when you get famous is that you start mistrusting why people are being friendly to you. So it's a bit of a, you know, how to put it. You start mistrusting people when they about why they want to get friendly with you. I've been told, now I don't know Dolly Parton, but I've been told that she is a wonderful, genuine person. The Dolly Parton story I could tell you, it's not firsthand, but a friend who does know Dolly said she came to a beach party once, dressed up with her heels and her wig and all the regalia, the cleavage and everything. And this person said, "Dolly, this is a beach party. You don't have to get gussied up like that." And she said, No. I do not want people to know what I look like in real life, because I can go to the supermarket. I can go to the movies. Nobody recognizes me. So anytime she goes out and at a public thing like that, she gets dolled up. John Prine comes to mind as somebody that I really adored. I didn't know him as well as I would have liked, but when our paths did cross, he was always very warm and open, and of course, incredible talent.
Absolutely. What a loss. I still feel that loss of John Prine. He was one of the first big names that we lost in the music industry to COVID.
Yeah.
And I still feel it.
I wrote a piece, a memorial piece for the Globe, and I can't remember exactly, but I remember one of the things that impressed me was he can sing a song that starts with "I am an old woman named after my mother." And it takes you about a tenth of a second to get over, but wait a minute, you're not an old woman part, and just get sucked into the story he's telling.
Yeah. It's an amazing talent. And like Hello in There, I always think, that is about him really speaking to people a lot older than him, as a 21-year-old or something, or however old he was.
Yeah.
That curiosity of life when
Yeah.
you're older, I always found fascinating.
And they did float his ashes down the Green River, as he requested in that song, Paradise.
Yep. That I heard that story. Chris Smithers I had on this show, and he was pretty close with John Prine, and I think very close with John. And he was still feeling the hurt of losing his friend. And what came across in that interview was one of the things that John always had really held true was if you were asked to play a song with John Prine, you do it. You never you never decline. Oh, I'm just going to watch. That was never the deal. John asks you to play, you play.
Well, the chance might not come again. So
yeah,
and now it won't.
It is true. A very tough loss. Do you remember where you were when the pandemic hit and like that moment of, this is not good for my business, or it might be some rocky roads ahead? Because for me, there were a few moments when, for me, I saw, and you know what, the world has stopped.
Well, I was an early adapter, of course, because I got the virus back in mid-March.
Yeah.
And I had just done about 6 or 7 shows in Florida. Well, actually, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And I had a week off. And then I was going to go, had another week's worth of shows in Florida. So I flew back up to Boston. And that's, I think, on the plane is probably where I got the virus. But the virus was happening when I was doing these shows in Florida, and I was trying to be, trying to keep my distance, but I was still going out and signing CDs and doing selfies with people that wanted it. Got back up to Boston, started feeling sick, and then the shows that I was going to go back and play got canceled, and I was too sick to do them anyway. And I realized, this could take a few months to clear up. And it's now looking like, I don't know, Drew. I think large indoor gatherings with people singing are going to be the last thing to come back. We not only need a vaccine, we need confidence in the vaccine. We need confidence. We need herd immunity, but we need herd confidence in the immunity. And that's going to take a while.
You've nailed it. I've talked with so many theater owners who say, even when we're allowed to be back in whatever form that is, the trusting of people to walk back into our theater, to walk back into our club, they think that's going to take some time too. And that's a huge fear of these owners. You nailed it. Yeah.
And it's, so this is why, again, it's important for us all to support these venues every way we can, because it would be a shame if pandemic's over, artists are ready to play, and there's no place to play.
Absolutely. Again, joined here by Tom Rush. Tom, we always take our final few moments and do a little rapid fire. First thing that comes to mind, you kind of got to answer with a quick answer. You up for it?
I'll give it a try.
All right. Favorite venue in the world to play in?
There's so many. There's so many of them. I love little clubs. I love great big concert halls. Symphony Hall. I love Symphony Hall. I love playing at Club Passim, which seats 80 people. Everything in between. I love the variety.
What is the album that made you pick up the guitar?
Probably the early rock and roll album. And it wasn't an album, but it was the rock and roll scene in the late 50s. I just loved Chuck Berry and Gene Vincent and Fats Domino. And one of the things, actually, a little side note, one of the things that was really impressive in retrospect about that era is there were all these hugely talented, big stars who were totally different. Fats Domino was nothing like the Everly Brothers. The Everly Brothers were nothing like Gene Vincent, who was nothing like Chuck Berry. It then all kind of became homogenous later on, but that era, which only lasted a few years, was when I decided I really wanted to play the guitar. If I can back up, there's another little story from earlier in my life.
Go for it.
I was forced to take piano lessons by my parents, who both wished that they had taken piano lessons as children, and it was horrible. My piano teacher was a woman named Miss Anna Carrico, whose nickname was the Iron Lady before Margaret Thatcher preempted the title. And I remember reducing the Iron Lady to tears on several occasions. I was not a good student. Nobody explained it was supposed to be fun. But I had an older cousin. He was my dad's age, but he was my cousin. He would come and visit, and he was a superstar in my eyes. This guy could take a lit cigarette, flip it back in his mouth, dive in the swimming pool, and blow smoke bubbles from underwater. When you're 10 years old, this is huge. And Cousin Bo played the ukulele, and he taught me how to play the ukulele, and that was fun. And that's where I really decided that it was fun to do this. I didn't have a career in mind or anything, but it was just fun to play these silly songs that he taught me. Wow. And then the ukulele turned into a guitar because I thought it was more manly when I was 14. But I was still playing the rock and roll stuff on the guitar until I heard Josh White, and that changed my life.
And now you're surrounded by guitars. There you go. Who's the artist that maybe out there today, right now, who maybe people would be surprised that Tom Rush is really into?
Oh boy, I don't do as much listening as I should. I'm kind of
It's because you have 3 books in the works.
I'm kind of a hermit, actually, musically. Matt Nakoa's stuff. Yeah. Matt is quite extraordinary because he is both a brilliant frontman and a brilliant accompanist. And it's 2 quite separate talents. Brilliant frontmen usually don't make good accompanists because they want to be out front. They want to look at me, look at me, look at me. And Matt has a marvelous talent for being invisible, but very supportive. So I'm really impressed with him.
What's the night where you had the most fun on stage? The one where maybe I don't know if it was a guest appearance or the night when everything was right, the perfect show for Tom Rush. Is there one night that sticks out? You were like, that's what it's all about.
There are a few. I played at Harvard Stadium one summer with Melanie, and they'd had a whole series of shows at the stadium, and a lot of the crowds had gotten rowdy. And I remember being put in the limo to be driven down to the stadium for the show, and the streets were lined with cops and barricades and dogs and police dogs. And I said, "What's going on?" And the driver said, "Oh, that's for you, Tom." I said, "Huh?" My crowd doesn't smash windows. And sure enough, at the stadium, I think they had a limited capacity of 3,000 or something, but there were another 5,000 people outside that wanted to get in and were climbing the fences. It kind of makes me think about, last Wednesday, but these were very friendly folks trying to climb the fences, and Harvard decided, okay, we're just going to let everybody in. Screw it. So we had about 8,000 people in the place, and they were quiet as a mouse for the quiet songs. And
when you think back to the areas that you really grew up in, I mean, when you talked about Cambridge there, I was just thinking about the folk scene. And I mean, it still actually is a great music scene, but I do feel like it is probably doesn't look anything like what it used to look like when you're talking about all the little clubs and the cafes. I always got the impression there was a guitar player playing in every place at some point. You could always go find some live music, which can be tough these days to go find a good live musician. And if you walk down the streets of Cambridge or hopefully not, I'm always pushing for more live music, but give me an idea what it was like growing up on that, being a part of that kind of folk scene, Cambridge, whatever.
It was really exciting. And I remember thinking at the time, this isn't normal.
Right.
This is something extraordinary is going on here. This can't be normal. It was everyday stuff, but it was just so exciting and the music was so good. The Club 47 was 1 block from my dorm. It was at 47 Mount Auburn Street originally, and 1 block from my dorm, and it was just too tempting. And the Club 47 was, in my mind, it was the flagship. There were a lot of coffee houses, but the 47 brought in the legends. They distinguished themselves by bringing in the legends, and you could sit there and listen to Maybelle Carter. You could listen to Flatt and Scruggs. You could listen to Sleepy John Estes and Jesse Lone Cat Fuller, some of the blues greats. And, they'd bring in balladeers from Ireland and Scotland, and you could hear the real stuff in this little 80-seat room. And it was just breathtaking. And then after every show, not every show, but most shows, there was a party over at Bob and Betsy Siggins' house. Bob was the psychopharmacologist banjo player. And there'd be a party, and some people, not the whole audience, but the legends would go, And I managed to weasel myself into the in crowd. And you could ask these legends, how do you do that thing you do? And they would show you. It was just jaw dropping.
There's some fun parties.
Yeah, some very fun parties, great music, and very casual, and you know, a lot
And
of.
they never got out of hand, right?
Not actually, no.
Yeah.
No, it was, you know, it was mainly beer in those days. Marijuana hadn't come along yet, or it was just starting to.
Is there a we did kind of all the nice people you've met in rock and roll. Has there been a disappointment? They say never meet your heroes.
Actually, yeah, I met Chuck Berry.
He was tough.
I played with Chuck Berry one time in Hartford, Connecticut. I was the opening act, and he was such a monster artist, but he'd had a hard time, especially with white people. And he pulled up in his limo, rolled down the window 2 inches, and told the promoter he wanted another $2,000 or he wasn't getting out of the car. And that apparently was a routine for him, which is why he didn't get bookings after a while. He had a pickup band. Everybody knew all of Chuck Berry's songs, so he could have a pickup band anywhere he went. Everybody knew note for note how to play Chuck Berry stuff. But he would, if they were too good, he would throw in an extra bar once in a while just to trip everybody up and make them look stupid. He also followed my sister, who was at the show, followed her into the ladies' room and was trying to push open the door to the stall where she was hiding. So
well,
it was a bit of a disappointment.
That would be a disappointment, yes.
Yeah.
That is a name that comes up quite a bit. And the money thing is definitely true with him. I've heard so many stories from artists that have said they've seen it with their own eyes. He would demand payment. If you didn't have it, he wasn't playing. Sometimes more. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe you're right. I'm sure there's a history of him being not paid or whatever. I'm sure there are cases like that, but that is definitely part of that legacy.
Yeah, my approach is, I'm not working for the promoter. I'm working for the audience, and so is the promoter. The audience is what comes first. And, I've done shows where I knew I wasn't going to get paid because I didn't want to send the audience home disappointed.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened often, but it has happened.
That is what we're talking about when we talk about the tough business, right? There's little things you don't think about.
Yeah.
Not so much of a little thing, but well, Tom Rush, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking some time with us today. I hope you enjoyed it. This has been fun.
It's been fun talking to you, Drew. Thanks. You asked good questions.
I try.
May I mention one more time, Rockport Sundays, the subscription series available at tomrush.com.
Absolutely. And, you have all the great songs. We do overlap in one regard. We both got our start with local college radio. I was at Bryant University, and that's how I got into my line of work.
Okay. Yeah. It's a gateway.
It is. You learn a lot of lessons there. You know what the biggest one I learned was? The person who used to run the station, the student, but was pretty much in charge, year older than me. Once had some friends on the air one night, 1 a.m., Bryant University, not thinking anybody's listening. There was some language being said and some stories that shouldn't have been told. And the number one rule that we learned when that person did not show up the next day was there is always somebody listening. Don't ever forget that when the microphone's on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on, Drew. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. I see the guitars. You want to play us out with a little something, or
I don't know how it's going to sound, how it would sound.
I am thinking it's okay. I heard you when you were fiddling around when I was coming on, and
let's find out. I don't have my guitar wired into the computer, but I think the mic will pick up.
I think so too. This is kind of the folk way.
Let's tilt it down a little bit.
Again, Tom Rush, this has been an absolute pleasure coming to us from Rockport. Go check him out. The website one more time, Tom.
TomRush.com. Easy to remember.
It is indeed. And Tom, play us out. Take it away.
We were talking about, let me tune just for a second. We're talking about Karina. Karina, Karina, where you been so long? Karina, girl, where you been so long? I ain't had no loving, babe, girl, since you've been gone. I got a bird to whistle, got a bird to sing, I got a bird to whistle, I got a bird to sing. I ain't got Karina, I ain't got a thing. Karina, girl, where you been so long? Karina, where you been so long? I ain't had no loving, babe, girl, since you've been gone.
Nicely done.
Left out about 6 verses, but
Beautifully done.
thank you, sir.
Tom, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay healthy to you and everyone around you, okay?
Thanks, Drew.
And we'll see you soon.
We'll see you next time.